hopefully people will keep on joining us. For those who don't know me, I'm Janice. I'm one of the MedSoc pharmacists in the ICB team. Today's PQS webinar will be presented by Sarah and Naomi, our dietitians, and this is specifically on the dietetic target that we have in the PQS for this year. So just a few housekeeping rules. If possible, can you keep your cameras off and microphones muted whilst they're presenting? There will be an opportunity to ask questions after the webinar, but please do put questions in the chat as well, and we'll answer those throughout or at the end as they get through those. We will be recording this webinar, and it will be posted on the PQS SharePoint page after the session, and we'll pop a message on the pharmacy channels as well to let you know that they're there. So as I said, I'm just going to give a brief intro to the PQS scheme for this year, and then I'll hand over to Sarah and Naomi to go through the details of those. So PQS, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's the prescribing quality scheme that we run each year. So in our 4th year now. It's an optional scheme that is open to all the GP practices within Bob ICB. What we're aiming to do with the PQS is to improve quality, safety and cost-effective prescribing within primary care across the ICB patch. So that launched at the beginning of April, and it will run through to the end of March next year. There are 5 targets in the scheme, and they're all worth equal points. The practices can choose to do all of their targets or just to choose some specific targets. So an email was sent to all your practice managers and the prescribing leads that we've got contact details for on the 8th of April to let you know of the scheme and how much and the value of the scheme for your practice. So if anyone hasn't received those, if you can email into our MOT inbox, and we'll get those sent out, and also make sure our contact lists are up to date if anything has changed. So in the scheme, we have got some criteria for participation in that. This year there is information on the script switch participation agreements as well, that the requirements for that. We have had a separate webinar on that as well already, so please do look at the participation agreement form, and also the recording is already up on SharePoint if you want more details on that. But any questions, please do let us know on the team inbox. You do have a designated MOT member as your lead, your contact for your practice as well. Agreement forms, if we could ask for those to be signed and returned to us by the 31st of May, so to let us know if you're participating in the scheme. In terms of script switch and performance and the requirements, there is a frequently asked questions, which is also on the SharePoint page already. So very quickly before I hand over, we have got webinars for all of the targets and the script switch. So some of them have already occurred, and if you didn't manage to catch them, the slides and the recordings are up on the SharePoint page. So our next one will be next week on DOAC optimization, and then we've got the falls prevention one to come as well. All the resources that you need for the PQS in terms of the details of the scheme, all the searches, data collection sheets, and the webinars are in there. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah and Naomi now.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm the lead prescribing for Bob ICB's prescribing dietetic team. And Naomi, I'm going to start with the presentation and I'm going to be handing over to my colleague Naomi. So if we go to the next slide, please, Janice. So this just gives you a summary about the PQS scheme for this year. So oral nutritional support is a priority area for NHS England South East region area. We are hoping to deliver and identify savings for the wider system, and Bob ICB is actually leading on this piece of work at a regional level. The aim of our PQS scheme is for practices to reduce the prescribing of non-preferred ONS, and we'll explain what we mean by that throughout the presentation. So non-preferred ONS is for ONS that patients are consuming orally. Remember, some of these products may also be administered via a feeding tube, and we have a separate tube feeding formulary that explains the formulary status when it's used in that way. The aim of the PQS scheme is to have better compliance with the ONS formulary, to continue to deliver savings and prevent future growth of the more costly ONS products. The aim is also for patients to receive a review of their ONS to make sure it is meeting their needs and receive further support where necessary. And also for all staff and practices to contribute to taking responsibility for managing ONS prescriptions. So if we go to the next slide, please. So what is non-preferred ONS? So we have 6 products that are displayed on the slide here, which we would like to improve the prescribing of. The PQS scheme will build on the momentum of the scheme from last year. You will be familiar with some of the products already on there because they were in our last year's PQS scheme, but we've also added some additional products from the Fortisip range. So the reason for expanding the range is our enteral feeding provider across Bob has changed. So we previously had a contract with Abbott and they manufacture the enteral products. We've now moved our enteral feeding contract to Nutritional and they manufacture the Fortisip ONS range. Hospital settings use the enteral feeding contract as a way of procuring their supply of oral nutritional supplements. So you will see with discharge summaries coming up hospital, there's going to be less requests for ensures, but you're going to be seeing more requests for the Fortisip products. Ensures remain included on the screen in the scheme because we still have a high usage, and also there's a lot of brand awareness amongst clinicians related to the Ensure products. In the last 12 months, Bob has spent 1.2 million on these 6 non-preferred ONS. Remember, there are some clinical situations where it may be appropriate to prescribe them, and I'll go through that on the next couple of slides. But we often find when someone is assessing a patient and clinically decides that they need oral nutritional supplements, we often find these non-preferred products are used because of the influence from the hospital setting and also the awareness of these products by clinicians. So next slide, please, Janice. So here on this slide, we have a summary about the Ensure products. All products on this slide are now both non-formulary for oral nutritional support and also for enteral tube feeding. Please note that the Ensure Plus and Ensure Compact was on the formulary as an amber restriction for tube feeding on our last version of the tube feed formulary. Ensure Plus Juice was also on both the oral nutritional supplement and enteral tube feed formulary with an amber status and should have only been prescribed if a patient for renal patients requiring oral nutritional support. Next slide, please, Janice. So on this slide, it takes you through those Fortisip ONS that we would like to focus on. So there's 3 products that are here on the slide. So we've got Fortisip bottle. So that's a 300 calorie, contains 300 calories, 11.8 grams of protein, and there's £1.45 per bottle. Its presentation size is 200 mils, and we would class this as a standard oral nutritional supplement. It's non-formulary on our oral nutritional support formulary at the moment, but on our previous version it was actually listed as green second choice, so you may see some patients that still have it on their prescription because of the previous formulary status. It's currently used in hospital setting and it's amber recommendation on the tube feed formulary. The next product that we have is Fortisip Compact. So this contains 300 calories, 12 grams of protein and costs £1.65 per bottle. And the presentation is 125 mils. And we would class this as a compact ONS. You will notice that it's essentially got the same amount of nutrition as the Fortisip bottle, but it's just a smaller volume, but it does cost more. The formulary status for this product is green restricted for oral nutritional support. And I'll explain what I mean by that status in a minute. It was historically green second choice on our previous version of the ONS formulary, and it's currently used in hospital. It's also on our tube feed formulary as amber status. And lastly, we have the Fortisip Compact protein. So this contains 306 calories, 18 grams of protein and costs £2.60. It has a presentation of 125 mils, and we class it as a specialist compact ONS, so it's a high protein product. It's amber status on both our oral nutritional support and tube feed formulary, and is again currently used in the hospital setting. So if we move to the next slide, This takes us through what we mean by green restricted formulary status. So this is a new formulary status for our ready-to-drink compact style ONS. Compact ONS is a lower volume, so it's typically 125 ml per bottle, and the usual dosage is 2 bottles per day. There are a couple of brands that have come out with a once a day dosage, and the presentation size is 250 ml. It's clinically appropriate to consider a compact style ONS when you've considered when you've tried the three things in advance. So first line would be to try a patient with food first advice. If that's contraindicated or not worked, then you might move on to the second line advice, which would be powdered oral nutritional supplements. If that's not worked or is contraindicated, then the third line would be to consider standard ready to drink ONS. So that's the 200 ml per bottle. If that's not worked or is contraindicated, then we would consider the use of the compact style ONS. So when we would consider the appropriate to use compact ONS would be if an individual or their carer are unable to prepare powdered supplements and the patient has not been able to consume adequate volumes of our standard ready to drink ONS, so the 200 ml presentation, and typically you need 2 bottles per day. Or the individual has trialled but has not been able to tolerate powdered compact style ONS, and they have a clinical contraindication to having the standard ready to drink preparation. So contraindications would include a patient that has dysphagia and they need to have a thickened product, or a patient is on a fluid restriction, so such as in renal or liver disease, and having that larger volume ONS is again contraindicated. I'll hand over to Naomi now.
Hello there, next slide please, Janice. So I'm Naomi, one of the other prescribing dietitians working with Sarah. So in terms of what we mean by preferred ONS, this amounts to all our first choices on the formulary. So we have just had a formulary update, and in that we've revamped the changeover guide. We've tried to make it simpler for non-dietitians to help them know what to choose first for a patient. So as Sarah was I was just going to explain what we could use for the first choices. So if someone can tolerate and make up a powder, then we do recommend choosing Ames Shake or the alternatives listed. And we have also recommended some milk-free and savoury options. And if they can't make up or tolerate a powder, we recommend opting for the Outplen Energy, so that's your second choice, or the alternatives listed. And there are some plant-based and juice options. And then the compacts would go next. So if you can't have a standard size volume or can't make up or tolerate the compact powders, then opting for the Outplen Compact Daily or the alternatives listed would be next steps. So when we use that terminology of preferred ONS, it's just an umbrella term for these first, second and third choices on the formulary. And the first line choice should always be food first. So these will all have green status on the formulary, other than the compact ONS that have that green restricted status, just making sure they've met those additional criteria. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at with this PQS scheme this year is looking at comparison of this preferred versus the non-preferred ONS. And we've set a threshold. So what we're looking for is for practice to achieve a 30% target of all ONS being those non-preferred. So out of all the ONS, only 30% should be those 3 ensures and those 3 forticips that we've highlighted. And what we've used the baseline of April to December 2024, which is a 9-month period. And then each month on the dashboards, you'll be given up-to-date data for how you've been doing the next 9 months, and then the next 9 months all the way through until the final target month, which will be the July 2025 to March 2026 period. And just to explain a bit more on the next slide, we want to make sure that practices do continue to prescribe nutritional supplements to all patients, whether they're existing or newly diagnosed with malnutrition, who meet the clinical criteria for treatment. So it may be that when a patient's reviewed, they no longer meet criteria. So for those, if there's no clinical rationale for them to have ONS, they may have their ONS treatment stopped. And then if they are deemed to have a rationale for having ONS, then we would aim to align more with the ONS formulary. So we're aiming for 30%, but we will still reward progress. So if a practice achieves less than 35%, they'll still get 10 points. And if a practice gets below 40%, they'll get 5 points. And if they aren't able to reach that 40% threshold, they won't get points. So the top line points will be 15 if they do get below that 30% target. And if a practice is already below 30%, then we ask that they maintain below 30% at the end of the year. Now, we won't penalise a practice if they have a clinical rationale for why they have exceeded that 40% target. It may be that you've got a niche population, and if you do have reason to believe that your patients are clinically justified for having these non-preferred ONS, then we'll accept that through the appeals process and be able to review, and you may still be awarded points, but it's not guaranteed. Next slide, please. So just wanting to give some examples of what that rolling 9 months may look like. So we've got that baseline of the April 24 to December 2024, which came out in February 2025. And then when March came out, it was the next 9 months going all the way through. So for dummy practice 1, they were 88% at the beginning of the year, and then they have been able to improve throughout the year and achieve that 30% target. So they would have been awarded the max points of 15. Dummy practice 2 was at 59% at the beginning of the year, and by the end of the year they'd gotten down to 31%, so they would be awarded 10 points, theoretically. And dummy practice 3 was at 75% and got down to 37% by the end of the year, and they would be awarded 5 points. So we get our data from EPAC data, and that's released in the middle of the month, and that will be then reflected on the dashboards. And it just means we're not expecting any evidence return forms this year. So that should save practices some time. Next slide, please. So where are we getting this 30% from? It's not just made up, it is based on data. So we looked at the PQS results from last year. So we were able, or you all were able, thank you very much, to stop 50% of the prescriptions, and 20% were switched to a formulary alternative, and 30% didn't change. Now, when we drill down into that, 20% of those, it's because they met exclusion criteria. So it may be that they had those ensures via a tube, or they had a particular mental health condition, or perhaps a learning disability, which meant it would have caused more distress for them to have their ONS switched and could have affected compliance and their treatment goals. So those were excluded. And also perhaps they had been recommended by a dietitian. So that's 20%, but then still 30% didn't change. So that 10%, we saw that perhaps there was just resistance. Either the patient or the relative didn't want to, or felt it might affect their goals and they might lose more weight. All those different factors came into play. So we will be hosting monthly webinars on handling those difficult conversations, because we know it can really evoke anxiety, this conversation around stopping ONS. So we want to be able to support as much as we can do. And Sarah will be sharing about when those monthly webinars will fall. Next slide, please. So the other 5 points of this PQS dietetic target will be awarded to GP practices that set up and write a standard operating procedure. The deadline is the 30th of June 2025, and the standing operating procedure should aim to support that transition of ONS prescribing from when they've been in secondary care to primary care, and also for making sure any ongoing prescriptions are aligned with the formulary. But we have written a guide which should help you. So we go on to the next slide and we'll work through it. So the aim of the standing operating procedure should create some step-by-step actions that work for your practice, and also assign someone who is responsible for completing those actions. So we really want to make sure that people know what to do and when they're doing it. So the first step would be to receive the prescription request. Maybe it's come from a dietitian or another healthcare professionals requesting it, or it's come from the hospital discharge summary, or it's a decision made in-house, or it's come from running the EMIS or System 1 search that we've prepared for you, which will actually pull a report of everybody currently on those ensures and forticips. Or it might be that a script switch prompt has come up when selecting a prescription. So no matter how it's come up, what's the process going to be, and who's going to be responsible for receiving that request and processing it and adding it onto the patient's electronic record. Next slide, please. And then it's looking at reviewing the actual prescription request. So how much of the product has been recommended, how often, and how, if they've come from hospital, perhaps how many days have already been supplied, and have they asked the GP to continue it or not, or review it or not, and perhaps they've been discharged by the dietitian. So who now is going to maintain responsibility for reviewing that patient's ONS ongoing? And has there been a goal set? Was it been that they want to maintain weight, or was it that they want to gain a specific amount of weight, or it's to promote wound healing? So is there a goal attached to the ONS so that we know when the treatment goal has been achieved? And steps 3 and 4 are around measuring the patient's malnutrition risk and also the nutritional status. So what factors come into play that's causing that malnutrition? Perhaps they've got a swallowing difficulty or a cognition issue, or they're acutely unwell. So all these factors come in, and we have a supporting flowchart which I'll show you shortly, which will go through step by step how you can review someone's nutritional status. And it's determining here what steps are you going to take, and again, who will be responsible for that. So next slide, please. So here is our flowchart. It's just had a recent update, but you should be familiar with it. It just goes through how you can screen someone for malnutrition, what the first steps are in terms of food first, and then what the next steps are with setting expectations for ONS with the patient. It's a short-term intervention to meet an actual specific goal that's clear, and then a review time that's agreed with the patient as well. Next slide, please. So next, you'll be considering which of the formulary alternatives are those preferred ONS that you'll be switching to. So the changeover guide has also been updated, and the link is there, and Sarah will show you it shortly, and we'll come back to her. So we'll be looking at switching them to an alternative. So just to be reassured, everything on that changeover guide is nutritionally equivalent to anything you're swapping it from, and will still help them meet their goals. So in hospital, their stocks are quite limited, whereas once they've come out of hospital, there's a lot more options that they can choose from. So that actually might help them meet their goals, because they might get to try some flavours that they enjoy better, and then they're more likely to take it and not waste it. And they might just be familiar with brands, but it's just reassuring them that it does meet their nutrition needs just as well. And then make sure that you document any changes you've made into their record. So who's going to be responsible for reviewing and changing the supplements? And then once you've added it on to the prescription, how long are you going to add it on for? Because we're seeing, with hospital discharges, we did some audit projects this year in one of our hospitals, and they showed for these lower risk patients that after they'd been discharged from hospital, they had a follow-up call 2 weeks afterwards, and for 93% of them, they actually didn't need their ONS anymore because they were back to baseline, they were feeling better again, eating back to how they used to. So that's the vast majority of them actually no longer needed their ONS. So that can be reassuring. So perhaps you want to only, if it's from a hospital discharge summary, you might just want to add it for one issue and then check in to see if they still need it. And if they do, of course, they can still have ONS if they still need it. It's just making sure it's aligned with the formulary. And then the nice guidance is to review ONS every 2 to 3 months. So how is that going to happen in your practice? Everyone does it differently. Some people set tasks, some people set reminders, some people put it in calendars, some people add it to the drug description. It's whatever works for your practice. So do suggest some actions that you think might work in your practice. And then reviewing it. So after that, decide whether you're going to do it in a month, 2 months, 3 months, or longer. Who's going to review it? And then perhaps running that email search again to pick up any ones that might have been missed. I'm going to hand back to Sarah now to carry on through the rest of the presentation.
If we go on to the next slide, please, Janice. So we wanted to share some data we collated from last year's PQS scheme. So this scheme focused on the prescribing of Ensure Compact, Ensure Plus and Ensure Plus Advanced. They were all non-formulary products for oral nutritional support. We wanted to look at who the audit's results shows these ONS were recommended by the following clinicians. So you can see that 30% of those prescription requests came from dietitians, 28% were in-house decisions and GP practices, 24% came from hospital discharges, and 18% came from other sources. So maybe that included patients, carers, relatives, and specialist nurses, consultants. So it can show you that there's quite an array of people influencing the prescribing for ONS initiations. Naomi also mentioned on the previous slide about a pilot project that we did. So we ran that project with Royal Berkshire Hospital, and we had some money to employ a dietitian, and we used that dietitian to review patients that had been prescribed ONS during their hospital admission as part of standard nutrition protocols. So often patients are started because they're nutritionally screened and they show that they're at risk of malnutrition in a hospital setting, and they typically start ONS in that setting if they have a MUS score of 1. And sometimes patients have actually got a MUS score of 0, but they end up on oral nutritional supplements and they aren't reviewed prior to discharge to see if they're still needed. So that's what our project dietitian focused on, reviewing patients that had ONS initiated, but they had a MUS screening result of 0 or 1. As part of that project, 338 patients were reviewed. 92 patients, or 27%, were assessed as needing ONS on discharge. And if they were discharged on the supplements, the project dietitian then contacted them 2 weeks post-discharge to check their progress. And we found after that telephone call, 24 or 7% of patients needed a further prescription for ONS. So I guess it's just quite interesting data. So those patients that are screened with a low MUS score in a hospital setting often don't need that ONS on an ongoing basis. So if we just move to the next slide, Janice, please. So how do you identify patients that you need to review? We have built a search that you can save from our SharePoint and import it into EMIS or System 1, and this will help identify any patients that have a current prescription for the Ensure or Fortisip products that we're targeting. This search can help mop up any patients you've missed when receiving prescription requests, and it can be a helpful thing to include in your standard operating procedure as to how frequently you will run it. If we go to the next slide then, Janice. The next couple of slides just look at changeovers. So if you do pick up any patients on those 6 non-preferred ONS and you clinically assess that they still need that supplement, this guide just takes you through what the suitable switches are. And we've got a link to that document, and again it's on our SharePoint page. So if they're on Ensure Plus milkshake or Fortisip bottle, we'd ask you to consider switching them over to a powdered supplement. If a powdered supplement is contraindicated, then we've got a ready-made option there. So our preference would be AIM Shake or Foodlink Complete, and then the ready-made options would be Ultraplen Energy or Actigain 1.5. If somebody's on Ensure Plus juice, we again would ask you to consider whether a powdered juice-based supplement could be considered. So you have the Actisolve smoothie product or the Foodlink smoothie. If they needed a ready-made product, the preference would be for Actigain 1.5 juice. Next slide, please, Dennis. And then we've got on here for Ensure Compact and Fortisip Compact, we'd ask you to consider switching them over to a powdered compact version. So you've got the AIM Shake Compact or the Foodlink Complete Compact. If they needed a ready-made version, then we have got the Ultraplen Compact Daily or the Actigain 2.4 Daily as alternatives. And for Fortisip Compact Protein, a powdered version, a more cost-effective powdered version would be the AIMS Actisolve Protein Compact, or the ready-made equivalent would be Freshibin Pro Compact. Next slide, please, Janice. So we are going to be running some monthly webinars to support you with this target. So it's an opportunity for you to drop in, ask any questions or queries. We're going to be running them on the 4th Tuesday of the month at 1 o'clock, and we've blocked out an hour. They'll run every month except in August. Invitations will be sent out to practice managers after this webinar, but if you would prefer to receive that invitation directly, please put your email address in the chat and we can send it to you direct. The topics that we plan to cover are listed, but again, if there's anything different to those topics that you would like covered, please let us know and we can tailor that to your needs. Next slide, Janice. So in summary, we're aiming for practices to reduce the prescribing of our non-preferred ONS products. You don't need to submit any evidence for this PQS target. What we do need for you to gain 5 points is to submit a standard operating procedure by the 30th of June, and that should cover your procedure for receiving, processing and reviewing ONS prescriptions. You will be awarded up to 15 points for your alignment with a formulary, and we're going to be measuring that using the EPAC data. We will also be releasing a monthly dashboard so you can monitor your progress throughout the year. And then if we just go to the last slide, Janice, this has just got our contact details on. So it's the same way if you want to contact any of the pharmacists or technicians within the medicines optimization team, we've just got that generic email address. And we can take any questions if people have any.
Haven't seen any questions in the chat, but there's lots of enthusiastic people wanting the link for the webinar, monthly webinar.
That's fine. Oh, is it Vanit?
Hi, it's Vanita here. So I have a quick question. I know that there are 5 points for writing up the SOP. Can I ask why Bob cannot send the SOP? It's all standardized so that we all have the same SOP to follow.
I guess each practice
Rather
work.
than 100 surgeries write their own SOP, it wouldn't, the standard should be the same, right?
I guess I would challenge that, because practices tend to deal with their prescription requests depending on your staffing, and different people within the practice we find take responsibility for the ONS prescription requests. Some people might have it pharmacists, some people delegate that to their technicians or GPs. So we have done a template for you. You just need to populate it reflecting how your particular practice will manage the ONS prescriptions.
So is there a template for the SOP?
Yes, yeah, we've got a template on the SharePoint, yeah. So if you want to follow that, that's fine. It just gives you some prompts to be able to tailor it to your staffing levels within your practice.
Okay, at least there's something. Otherwise, it just sort of seems like, why do we need to write?
You don't need to write it from scratch, but I guess we just need a bit of tailoring to understand how your practice will manage them.
Sure, we can do that then. Lovely, thank you.
There was one question from Kate around what is the EPAC dashboard data under within the EPAC2 system? So I guess some of the practices might have access to might have requested access to their EPAC data. So I don't know if people are looking at their own data as well, maybe.
Should I take this one? I do the data. I'm not sure I understand the question. There isn't like a pre-built dashboard from EPAC on ONS. We've built our own. So we've filtered out tube feeding. So when it's dispensed by the enteral feeding providers, we exclude those. So that tries to alleviate or exclude anyone that's had their ensures or forceps from Nutritional or Abbott where possible. Obviously, some people still pick it up from Boots, so we can't exclude everyone, but there's just, at least it does it for the most part. But yeah, we just built our own dashboard that looks at adult ONS, but that will be part of the Bob dashboard. So you'll have your baseline and then you'll have the current month, and it will be color coded to see if you're at what points you're at that point. Please clarify if I've not answered the question correctly.
I think someone else is asking how they access the dashboard.
I believe they'll be sent out from the team inbox every month, like last year. So at the end of the month-ish.
Okay. Vanita, did you have another question?
Did I put my hand up again? No, sorry.
Okay. Sorry. Samia?
Hi, this is maybe less of a question, more of an observation, or just want your input here. So there is this tendency to, and I'm not going to say it's just the GPs or anything like that that are doing that, to straight away go for ONS and skip the food first part. And because I did the PQS for, was it 2 or 3 surgeries? It was a very interesting PQS, by the way. Really, you learned so much during the process, isn't it? But there is this tendency to jump straight to ONS and skip the food first. And there's only so much we can say. So I was wondering, as part of your either your monthly thing, or maybe when you send a comms out, could you prepare a super short, GPs don't have time to read long presentations. So a super short couple of slide kind of thing. I'm thinking of preparing one from my end anyway, but it might be better coming from you. Which just has all that info there, if possible. But that is my thoughts. Because I'm going to be starting on working on this SOP thing for one of the practices. So I thought I might prepare something of that sort. But if you do have something, it will be very helpful.
Thank you. That's really useful feedback. We can Definitely do a reminder around expectations, because it's really difficult when you've got a patient sat in front of you that's been screened as being at risk of malnutrition. You're not going to be able to reverse that situation instantly, and I guess it depends how sometimes some people might need it a long time to come into a GP practice to flag that, or it's being picked up when they're being seen for another reason, and there's sometimes a real significant urgency and feeling that we need to correct that straight away, and that will depend on patients' clinical risk. So there may be some patients where it may not be suitable or it's contraindicated to try food first. You may need to move on to ONS, and we appreciate that. What we need though is for people to use the formulary compliant ONS if that's the situation. If it's not an urgent need, if it's somebody that's had a long-term low BMI, then food first is an appropriate thing to consider. And obviously long term, we don't want people left on supplements for forever and a day. We need to make sure that people are adjusting their diet to address their malnutrition risk. It's a bit like obesity. We don't put everybody on a medication to manage that. We need to try some lifestyle things, and it's the same thing for malnutrition, although I recognize in some clinical situations that isn't appropriate. So we can definitely do a refresher. That's really, really helpful feedback. And our first monthly webinar will go through reminding how to appropriately prescribe ONS. We didn't want to overload you today because there's obviously lots of information to take in, so we will definitely do that in our first monthly webinar, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And if you do have any specific questions or queries, Naomi and I are here anyway to help you, so we can always help you outside of those meetings as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions that I've missed? Or
there was one from Chelsea in terms of the EMIS search. So does that pull out all the patients who don't comply with the formulary, so i.e. on the non-preferred ONS? Is that what it pulls out?
Yes, or just oh, sorry, Naomi, go on.
It's built to just pull out those any patient that has got a current prescription for those 6 ONS, and then it is coded to exclude people that have a SNOMED code in place for tube feeding and variations of tube feeding. So if they've got a slightly different code that I've not thought of, then they might still be included, but for the most part it should just be those using it for ONS.
And for those on system 1, do they need to contact our team?
No,
or are they on there? They've built
a variation of it, yeah.
Benita's got a hand up, but I don't know if that's a new hand, old hand.
I don't have a hand up. I don't know why it keeps going up. Ignore it.
Don't think there's any more questions. There's a few questions about dashboard. Mini's been putting up a lot of the food first resources, the links to them on there as well.
Yeah, we'll put a link. I'll add a link when I come off this, is just where all our resources are. But yeah, I don't know if you want to say something, Mini.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, Sarah, I noticed that on the, so all of you, I'm sure you know already that on Clinox, that's where we've uploaded, as was said at the beginning by Janice, all the information about the PQS, and then there's a subsection on ONS with all the information. I just noticed there were some FAQs for GPs on there as well, Sarah and Naomi, but I clicked onto it and I don't know whether the link's broken, but have a little look yourself and see if that link is broken, because actually that might answer some of I can't remember, was it Benita that asked for, I can't remember, somebody asked for some information for GPs that was perhaps bullet points that would be helpful, so that might help there as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll double check all the links then before we send them out. Sorry, we have some issues sometimes with technical things keep moving where they're being hosted, but we will definitely check them before we send them out.
Can't see any more questions, but just if there are links that aren't working and you do notice them, please do email us and let us know, and then we can get those sorted as well. But yeah, can't see any more questions. Naomi and Sarah.
I'm just wondering, would it be helpful, like you're going to do the upcoming webinars, would it be helpful about how do we need to do something about how to have those conversations with patients, Sarah and Naomi? I don't know what colleagues on the call think about that, because I mean, as a GP, I think I think somebody mentioned this before, isn't it? That you know, patients, it's an easy thing to do, and actually having a more sort of in-depth conversation around, you know, well, we've got to do your must score, we've got to think about other, you know, things that could be causing your weight loss. You know, are there other things that are driving this? You know, we need to sort of think a bit more about that consultation. I'm just putting it out there whether that might be helpful as well, about how, you know, how you have that kind of consultation and structured review. Feedback to Sarah and Naomi separate if you think that would be helpful.
We definitely picked up from PQS last year that the main kind of populations of patients that we were finding were on supplements. A lot of dementia patients, which is obviously, again, quite a difficult scenario and will affect their nutrition depending on what stage they are. Substance misuse, we were going to do a session on when patients and relatives are perhaps requesting ONS prescriptions, but patients don't, you know, when you check that must and wait, it's not indicating that ONS is clinically indicated. So how to manage those, because we recognize it's really difficult to have those, and you need some kind of like almost a script on hand to be able to go to when you are managing that conversation. So we will definitely look to do those in those monthly sessions. And it is really, you know, it is a difficult conversation to have, but we're hoping to upskill you and give you more confidence to do that. And it's remembering that the prescribable, the ONS, it is a food and drink at the end of the day. There's no magic thing in there. You can do, you can achieve the same thing with changes to your diet. Unfortunately, I guess the ONS is the easy reach to, and you feel like you're doing something for your patients, but it's not necessarily the most appropriate option for somebody, and it's definitely, or shouldn't be, a long-term solution either.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you've always said to us is actually it's much more enjoyable to eat real food if you can, isn't it? Actually, the pleasure that comes from being able to eat food is obviously there too. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Naomi.
There was just a question to ask if the Tuesday webinars that you're planning on doing, will they be recorded?
Yes, we'll definitely record everything for everybody. So if you're not available on Tuesdays, and then we'll ask you for feedback. Perhaps we can do a kind of feedback route at the end of those sessions as well, so we can continue to improve them and make sure that they meet your needs as well. And they're an opportunity for you to share how your PQS scheme is going. So in one practice you might be, you know, doing something that you're finding that's really helpful. So it's an opportunity for you to share your work as well.
Yeah, no more questions.
Should we bring it to a close then, Janice, do you think? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for logging on. We appreciate that.
Thank you very much, everyone.